Hi there, folks. My name's Ian McClatchy. This is Rod Adams. And I've been here at Google since June of last year. And I guess this is a public video, so I won't talk about what I do. But so I met Rod online. He's running a blog about atomic energy, and he's a fairly regular poster, and he's interesting to read. And so he's been working on this company, Atomic Engines, for quite some time. And he's here to give a talk about some of the justifications for that company, what they're trying to do, and atomic energy in general. And so I'll let you take it away, Rod.
All right, thank you. I came here today to share a passion. The stimulus for my visit was finding a presentation on Google Video by Dr. Robert Bussard titled, "Should Google Go Nuclear?" I think Dr. Bussard has the right idea. A fast-growing company needs to think hard about its future energy sources. But Dr. Bussard is a scientist who spent much of his career in fusion research. And when he came here, he talked about technology that might someday in the distant future be available. I'm here today to talk to you about the other nuclear power, nuclear fission. My plan is to captivate you with a new perspective about fission that'll help you to see it has the proven capabilities today to ease many immediate problems. If you're concerned about global climate change, urban air quality, fossil fuel addiction, endemic poverty, fresh water supplies, and soil erosion, you might find new reasons for optimism in the next few minutes. I plan to help you create a mental image of fission that shows you that it's the only technology available today that has a prayer of reducing our dependence on fire. Until humans harnessed fire, we stayed mainly in tropical areas of the world where there was little chance of frigid temperatures. We had no means of preparing food, and we were limited to eating fruits and meats that had no need for cooking. People were aware of fire, but it must have been a frightening phenomenon that resulted only from stray lightning strikes. At some point in human history, people figured out how to control fire, but they had little ability to start one at will. The social position of fire tenders became important as the eternal flames of the village fire played a central role in developing civilization. History is not clear, but it probably took several thousand years before many humans had the ability to cause a spark at will using flints and stones or rubbing sticks. Now, a long time ago, I tried to learn those skills, and I can tell you that the guys who learned the knack probably were very valuable to their civilization. History of fire and civilization continued their closely associated paths as people learned how to start fires at will, contain the fires inside their residences, direct the deadly waste products out of their residences, and at the start of the Industrial Revolution, figured out how to harness the heat from fire to do work. As people learned more about fire and its power to improve their lives, they also learned about its limitations. They got burned. They got cold when the fuel for the fire ran out, and they choked on the smoke if it became too dense. In some places, whole cultures died away as the rate of fuel consumption exceeded the rate at which fuel could be renewed by natural processes. At some point, humans figured out that supplying fire fuels was a darn good business. For most of recorded history, people who controlled fire fuel sources achieved great economic and social wealth. When firewood was the preeminent fuel, the kings owned the forest. When people figured out how to find and burn coal, the mine owners became incredibly wealthy. Oil has been an even greater source of wealth and power almost since the day that Colonel Drake drilled his first well in Pennsylvania. By 1947, oil had surpassed coal as the major fuel source in the United States. The fuel supply business started the process of globalization when the British built coaling stations to support their naval power. The very first multinational corporations were petroleum hunter-gatherers. There are several reasons why fuel became such a good business. It requires a constant input of new material. The materials have natural limits on their abundance. The power produced makes life immensely better for people. Because of the above, there's almost no need for salespeople. When moving massive quantities of material, bigger is better, and controlling the supply of a necessary commodity provides you with profitable pricing power. As is the case in any business where prosperity is based on scarcity, fuel customers have chafed under the control of the suppliers. Poor people were often incarcerated as a result of scavenging trips in the King's Forest. Londoners did not much like their dependence on coal suppliers, and the words big oil has described a boogeyman for my entire adult life. For much of the industrial age, the relationship between fuel buyer and seller is more like has been rather uneven. It's been almost like the relationship between an addict and a pusher. In the early part of the 20th century, a small band of physicists discovered a new natural phenomena that offered the potential to break the power of the fire pushers. At least one famous physicist, Ernest B. Rutherford, dismissed the idea of power from atomic nuclei as moonshine. But others realized that the difference in the atomic mass per nucleon for large atoms and small atoms represented a huge potential energy source. Although the mass defect is small, when you multiply it by the speed of light squared, you come up with a very large number. All the physicists needed was a way to break large nuclei and turn them into small ones. They needed a method. There were a number of key discoveries made in rapid sequence that allowed a small international community of physicists to realize that Rutherford was wrong when he made the moonshine comment. They learned that nature had provided simple tools for breaking large atoms. Once they figured out the natural process, they realized how easily it could be replicated. James Chadwick made one of the most important discoveries when he found neutrons, particles that were as massive as protons, but without any electric charge. He determined that neutrons represented between 50 and 70% of the mass of atomic nuclei, with heavier elements having a larger percentage of neutrons in their nuclei. Since these large particles, neutrons, didn't carry a charge, they could enter into other nuclei without being deflected. Enrico Fermi performed a systematic series of experiments on the elements in the periodic table. And he found that neutrons were marvelous tools for changing the property of atomic nuclei. He made stable elements into radioactive isotopes, and he even produced elements that had never before been found in nature. The philosopher's stone that alchemists had long sought had been found. There are ways to use neutrons to create gold out of other elements. After more experimentation and exchanges of ideas, it became clear that neutrons, with the right amount of energy, could predictably break certain heavy isotopes into two pieces of roughly equal size. Lee Smitner and Otto Frisch named this new phenomenon fission once they decided it looked a lot like biological cell division. Since the mass of the two pieces was about 0.1% less than the mass of the original heavy metal, a tremendous amount of energy was released, 200 million electron volts. Gram for gram, the energy release was about 2 million times more than the most energetic chemical reaction, where only neutrons are exchanged in molecule formation. Though the early physicists may have a different mental picture, I like to compare the fuel quantities like this. A pound of uranium, which can be represented by the physical size of 3 shooter marbles, contains as much energy as 30 tanker trucks full of oil. Now, I'm not a real strong guy, but I can actually hold more than 3 marbles in my hand. I can hold 10, okay? So I can hold the energy value of 100 tanker trucks in my hand. Okay? The energy release could have remained a laboratory curiosity, except for one more key discovery. Remember, heavy metals like uranium have a higher neutron to proton ratio than the lighter elements do. When heavy metal nuclei split, there are extra neutrons available on the product side of the fission balanced equation. Those freed neutrons are born with enough energy to cause additional fissions. And the scientists figured out if there were enough of those extra neutrons, they could be used to create a self-sustaining chain reaction. To put this incredible period of atomic discovery into historical perspective, I want to remind you what else was happening at the same time. James Chadwick discovered the neutron in 1934. Mittner and Frisch made their fission analysis in the very early stages of 1939. People around the world had figured out that uranium and thorium could fission, and there were a number of replications of the same experiment. Okay? If one of those, they had also figured out that there were more than one neutron released. There was several more than two on average released per fission. And the reaction could continue and release controllable heat. Okay? Leo Szilard, a man given to taking long baths and thinking a lot while he's walking down the streets of London, filed a British patent on the idea of an atomic chain reaction in 1934 as soon as he heard about neutrons. Okay? Almost immediately after he heard about uranium fission, he came up with a method. He said that if you put graphite and uranium together in a lattice formation, you could produce a workable nuclear reactor that would have a controllable chain reaction. Now, he held off on filing the patent for that device until 1955. Hitler and his Nazis were overrunning Germany at the same time. They dominated. Of the people involved in this chain of discoveries, a large portion of them were Jews who were on the run from the Germans. Frisch and Mittner, for example, were already in exile from Germany. Many of the key physicists were either Jewish and married to Jews, like Enrico Fermi. They realized that fission could happen slowly enough so that uranium could replace other fuels, but they also guessed that the reaction could be forced to happen explosively. They knew that the labs they left behind had people employed who knew most of the knowledge required to make that explosive reaction happen. On December 2nd, 1942, Enrico Fermi, Leo Szilard, and a small band of scientists, engineers, and workers started, controlled, and stopped the first chain reaction in a simple arrangement of graphite bricks and uranium spheres. They were using Szilard's original idea. That reaction took place with well-understood, readily available materials, used student labor in the construction force, and occurred at room temperature in an unheated building in Chicago in December. Unlike the highly publicized concept of cold fission is a reality that can be repeated by anyone with a moderate education and the right materials. Fission's use in the bomb came first only as an accident of history. If the physicists were very interested in energy production and would have taken that path if they had not been more concerned about the very survival of the planet. They were certain that the scientists they left behind in Nazi-controlled Europe were just as aware as they were of fission's power for both good and evil. Once they finished the war, many of these scientists were ready to begin exploring the peaceful applications of the new physical phenomenon. There was much to learn. The scientists had done enough foundational work that it was time for the engineers to begin creating. There was an incredible level of excitement about the possibility of crossing the ocean using mere buckets full of fuel instead of thousands of tons of coal or oil. There were thoughts about atomic trains, planes, and even a few out there dreamers that talked about atomic automobiles. Unfortunately, the US government had different ideas. From 1941 to 1953, a near total veil of secrecy cloaked the American atomic enterprise. Patents were nationalized. ownership of all of the key materials was restricted to the government, there was little room left for creative tinkering with a newly discovered energy source. People like Leo Szilard left the field and found other opportunities. Of course, the important physical facts were discoverable, and the secrecy effort did little to stop other nations from developing the possibilities and even developing their own weapons. By December 1953, President Eisenhower, one of the true heroes of the 20th century, made his famous Atoms for Peace speech and opened up the world of atomic fission research and development. In America, we had given certain companies a head start in atomic knowledge acquisition. We invited them into the cone of silence through their participation in the Manhattan Project and in certain government-funded reactor power projects during the 1940s and early 50s. The majority of the companies cut into the game were large, established corporations with a lot of equity in maintaining their enterprise. Many were already in the energy business as fuel suppliers, equipment manufacturers, or electricity suppliers. They had ways of doing things that led them to certain key decisions. One of their design choices was that the best path for development was to make the reactors as big as possible. This idea made sense to them as engineers indoctrinated in the equations that support the concept of the economy of scale, and as industrialists who know that they need to protect their domain by raising the barriers to entry to potential competitors. These large American companies had a pretty good run with the technology they learned in government projects. They captured growing shares of some key markets. Sometimes they required the assistance of the US government for some of their marketing wins. But during that period, there was also some great projects that took advantage of the unique characteristics of fission compared to its combustion competition. We built zero-emission vessels, ZEVs, that could spend months underwater without any outside air or need to dump their exhaust gases, like the one that was my home for about 3 years. We built a beautiful, but kind of impractical, cargo ship / luxury liner called the NS Savannah that brought the hope of atoms for peace to the world for about a decade. Now notice how beautifully the lines merge with the cranes. The cranes were designed not for loading cargo, but for being pretty, okay? This bow doesn't really represent a way to carry a whole lot of cargo, but that's where the cargo holds were, so it was hard to load, okay? Savannah did a bunch of tours and brought Atoms for Peace to the world before she was laid up as being uneconomical to operate. Oh, by the way, back here in this section, there was a swimming pool, 100 luxury staterooms, and a dance floor. Not real useful for operations of a cargo ship. When Savannah was laid up as being uneconomical, it was 1972, 1 year before the price of oil for its competitors jumped by a factor of 4. We built power plants for the most remote and hard-to-supply areas in the world. PM3A, which is actually in this building here, powered the McMurdo station in Antarctica for about a decade. NR1 was designed to reach the bottom of the ocean and stay on station in weather that sends everybody else into safe harbor. NR1 helped explore the Britannic, the Andrea Doria, the USS Monitor. She was instrumental in investigation of Egypt Air Flight 990, and she recovered pieces from Challenger. NR1 is still doing valuable research 28 years after being launched. Now notice, NR1 is only 400 tons displacement for the entire ship. Her crew's 11, yet she's powered by a nuclear reactor that provides all of the electricity necessary not only for propulsion, but for all of her very sophisticated side-scanning sonars. Though there were some costly learning experiences, we also built a number of large central station power plants that captured market share from coal, oil, and natural gas. A little understood fact is that nuclear power today supplies 28% more electricity in the United States than all sources together did in 1960. Okay? Nuclear power surpassed all sources together by 1991, less than 50 years after the basic physical phenomenon had been proven in a laboratory. Nuclear fission replaced fire as the energy source for 100% of U.S. submarines and aircraft carriers, made inroads into the surface ship market, captured about 80% of new electric plant orders in the U.S. from 1963 to 1973, replaced oil in France's electrical power system, and made inroads against coal and oil in a number of other markets, including the UK, Germany, Italy, Spain, Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan. In 1970, nuclear fission's market share was essentially zero. It's a dotted line down here, okay? And it's going up there. Okay. And by 1990, it was 7% of the energy supply and 16% of the world's electrical power supply. That portion has remained essentially constant since then. The historical picture of U.S. energy production shows how fission began to muscle into a market that was previously dominated by fire fuels. Okay, here's total fuel consumption by energy source from 1635 to 2005. Wood starts making a large share. We started burning wood for things like railroads and a few other things like that, so it started to become a commercial fuel. Coal, of course, became very important. Petroleum, which includes lots of different liquids, but petroleum in general. Then natural gas took its share, and here, about 1970, nuclear power started ramping up. Okay, the green line is hydroelectric power, and you can see that in 1930s it jumped up, and then it pretty much stayed constant. Okay? In the U.S., between 1970 and 1995, nuclear electric power was ramping up. Fortunately, we had nuclear electric power because this is what our crude oil production in the U.S. was doing at the same time. Peaked out in about 1970, almost exactly the same time as nuclear power began to ramp up. For a variety of interesting reasons, it can be the subject of numerous debates. The first fission atomic age ended slowly between 1973 and 1986. Most of the operating plants kept running, but the rate of construction slowed dramatically, even in those places where it never quite stopped. One reason that is not often mentioned is that fire fuel sellers cannot enjoy losing market share to fission. Though they talk a lot about alternative energy, they rarely, if ever, mention nuclear power. You know you are threatening when your competition's reaction is to ignore your very presence. A critical thinker can also recognize the difference between words and actions. For example, BP changed its logo to that green starburst that makes an intellectual link to its role as a solar energy supplier. This is BP's profit. That's not revenue, that's profit in 2004, $17 billion. This is their investment, that little blue line down there, in solar energy, okay? $25 million in the same year. The first atomic age was also similar in nature to the first part of the computer era. With few exceptions, the machines were large, capital-intensive, and available only to the few. Remember, the economy of scale was a driver. The operators became members of a privileged priesthood where protecting the secrets of their special knowledge was a key part of their prosperity. Limiting commercial fission development to the Central Station electric power plant reduced options. When electric power companies in the 1990s decided they had enough capacity, there was no other markets for nuclear fission to look at. If I did not mention the byproducts, I am sure that people would ask, what about the waste? My honest and sometimes exasperated answer is, what waste are you talking about? And the reason I say exasperate is because so many people throw out that phrase, "what about the waste?" as a rhetorical trump card. They really don't want to hear the answer. They think they have the argument won as soon as they bring it out. All the material that remains after fissionable fuel is consumed has potential uses. The fuel manufacturing process, along with the operating design limits that we impose, makes sure that all of the fuel remains locked up inside the fuel rods. All the byproducts that last more than a few decades are still useful as fuel. With the second generation technology we're using today, only 5% of the initial potential energy is released before we take the fuel out and store it. The shorter-lived fission elements have multiple potential uses. Many of them are rare or even unique materials with useful physical properties. N. Nadir, a pen name for one of the frequent diarists on the Daily Cause, is a chemist. And he and I have shared a lot of information over the last few years, but he's pointed me to a lot of research reports that talk about methods to extract rhodium, ruthenium, and platinum group metals from used fission fuels. Those are some very valuable metals that have a lot of commercial uses. Though some describe fission waste products as deadly, there has not been a single instance that I can find anywhere in the world, and I've been searching for a long time, using some great search tools, by the way, for a story where someone has been killed by exposure to the waste products from commercial power. I've been unsuccessful. Unless your real goal is to kill the fission goose, you can see that used fission fuels are a tremendous resource and part of the good news when compared to the combustion fuels competition. The next fission age will be different. I predict it'll move along the same path of democratization of the technology that's happening in so many other key industries, most recently in computing. Key contributors to this disruptive new age will be fission devices that make controlling the process as simple as controlling a charcoal fire. Perhaps you've heard of pebble bed reactors, maybe from the Wired article in September 2004 titled "Let 1,000 Reactors Bloom," or maybe even from 60 Minutes last week, where Andy Kadak was on and talked about a melt-proof reactor. Farrington Daniels, a US scientist, first proposed the idea in 1947. The concept is similar to self-lighting charcoal. If you put the fuel in a moderator in simple shapes, you could pile those shapes into containers and control it to provide the desired amount of heat. There were a couple of materials technologies that were not quite ready in 1947, but the idea was good enough to gain at least some intellectual traction. Okay, I like pebble power. Rudolf Schulten turned Daniel's idea into reality with his 30-year project to design, build, test, and operate a reactor called the AVR and a follow-on called the thorium high-temperature reactor in Germany. I'm passing around a pebble for your enjoyment, and it is an inert pebble, so. The smallest unit in the system is a triple-coated, 0.5 millimeter diameter uranium dioxide fuel particle. It's coated with 4 layers: a porous carbon buffer, an inner pyrolytic carbon, a silicon graphite carbide barrier which prevents any gases from being released, and then a pyrolytic carbon outside that protects it again. You take about 10,000 to 20,000 of those little particles, they're about the size of a grain of sand, and you put them inside a 6 centimeter diameter graphite sphere, okay? And then you have the fuel spheres, look like balls in the one that I'm passing around. Power pebbles combine fuel, containment, moderator, and a single unit to be mass-produced and used in many different configurations, many different sizes of reactors. Schulten and his team developed coating processes and tested a wide range of feed materials that showed the concept could handle various chemistries of uranium, plutonium, and thorium. Chinese researchers at Tsinghua University are keeping the concept moving forward with their operating 10 megawatt thermal HTR-10. There are commercial pebble bed units in construction in China. Dutch researchers have looked at the concept for cogeneration plant, and there's a company in South Africa called the PBMR company, which is looking to develop what they call small, what I still consider large reactors, about 160 megawatts, pebble bed modular reactors. It should be ready for full-scale deployment by about 2020. Adams Atomic Engines, Inc., it's my company, has a slightly different concept and a potentially more aggressive timeline. We also believe that 1,000 reactors is just an intermediate goal. There are many simplifying aspects of pebble beds. They can be easily produced and have a repeatable fuel shape. If you put enough spheres in a container, you can build a heat-producing reactor. Shielding and reflectors and control rods give you the ability to control and establish the temperature of the reactor. The graphite/heavy metal matrix provided by Pebbles gives the reactors two key characteristics: a negative temperature coefficient of reactivity and a very high maximum temperature limit. The negative temperature coefficient of reactivity gives pebble bed reactors a natural negative feedback loop that provides stability. If the demand for power increases, the rate of fission increases. If the demand drops, the fission rate drops to match the demand. If all flow through the reactor stops, the reactor heats up to a steady state temperature limit below the maximum temperature limit for the fuel and doesn't get any hotter. Eventually, it starts cooling down as a natural process of convection and conduction give you some heat transfer to the environment. Fission is very responsive and allows a single power plant to provide a variety of needs that changes rapidly as desired. Submarines, icebreakers, and aircraft carriers demonstrate the responsiveness of fission every day. Graphite and the heavy metal oxides don't melt till you get to be about 300 degrees C, and that maximum temperature limit, where there's no damage at all, no release of fission products, is about 1600 C. The maximum temperature in a transient is somewhere on the order of 1400 C. It's been proven through actual testing, not just simulations, that these reactors hit a steady state temperature limit. If you're looking for a proof, you can find a video of a recent test of the HTR-10 in China. It was done by ABC, that's Australia Broadcasting Corporation, Catalyst program. Look for nuclear China. It's about minute 14 or so in the video. You'll see the test of the HTR-10, where they simply stopped all cooling flow. Spheres provide large flow paths for a gas coolant, leading to a natural marriage between these systems and Brayton cycle gas turbines. Brayton cycle is the heat engine that's the basis for jet engines, turboprop aircraft, commercial ship engines, and even some of those natural gas-fired electric power plants that were such the rage during the 1990s. Brayton cycles are simple. Just remember, suck, bang, blow, go, and get your minds out of the gutter. Compress the gas, heat the gas, expand the gas through a turbine to produce power. Then you have two choices. In an open cycle, like a jet engine, you exhaust the gas and bring in new cool gas. In a closed cycle, take the gas from the exit to the turbine, go through a cooler, go through the cooler, and you go back into the compressor for another round. Most pebble bed projects in the world use high-pressure helium as the coolant with specially designed machinery and piping system to contain and move the helium around. Helium as a gas has special characteristics. It's very light, monoatomic, has a high speed of sound, has a high heat transfer rate. It's completely different than most other gases that are used in industrial production. At AAE, Adams Atomic Engines, we will use low-pressure nitrogen as our working fluid. This choice enables us to use turbo machinery that is currently being manufactured for air-breathing operations. Our computations show the simplicity of the design allows economical sizes that are much smaller than almost any other proposed nuclear machine, with room for further shrinkage as we learn more. We can take advantage of the economies of scale and mass production to serve markets that cannot be economically served by other nuclear heat engine concepts. We've been doing our homework for more than a decade. Actually, I've been doing this since about 1991. And we believe that there are huge market opportunities that have been ignored. We're engaged with some interested parties that have never before been able to consider using fission as a solution to pressing energy problems. There are villages in rural Alaska that currently depend on large diesel engines that burn a smelly, expensive fuel that has to be delivered during the summertime on a river that's frozen most of the year. There's a Pacific Island nation where the monthly fuel bill reached $70 million per month during the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. That was a doubling in about a 2-month period. One of our more surprising potential custom partners is a company that wants to use the heat and electricity from Adams engines to help convert coal and water into a clean-burning diesel fuel that can be transported by pipelines instead of open container coal cars. Another wants to use Adams engines to propel LNG tankers, and then when you get into port, to use the heat from the engines to gasify the product and put it into pipelines. There's even a serial entrepreneur in Texas, and I just spent the last weekend with he and his team, who wants to build an Adams engine in his own backyard. Now, he's got a pretty good-sized backyard, okay? As a demonstration that atomic power can be safe and clean enough to run in the basement of any large building. Adams Atomic Engines plans to store, this is his house. He's got 6 homes along the lake in Texas, about maybe 2 hours outside of Austin. We're going to store our engine byproduct material in carefully designed, licensed containers until enough of them have been accumulated in a single space to allow economical recycling. The pebble bed fuels have already demonstrated they can achieve burnups of between 8 and 20%, vice the 5% that's available for the second-generation light water reactors that are currently operating. The increased fuel consumption, fuel efficiency, will reduce the amount of fuel that will need to be recycled. Okay? We like the phrase reduce, reuse, and recycle as a way to handle the byproduct materials. When I put my dinner and leftovers into a Tupperware container and put them in the fridge for next day's lunch, I've created leftovers that are valuable to me. If I take those same products and toss them in the trash, I've created what will be the next morning potentially deadly waste materials that have to be hauled away. In the energy business, our fire-based competition doesn't have a choice. They produce such massive quantities of waste materials that they have to push them into the environment through smokestacks or exhaust pipes almost immediately. I've talked long enough. You can find more information on the web. You guys are real good at finding things. Okay, suggested search terms are atomic engines, Rod Adams, The Atomic Show on the podcast network, Atomic Insights, Adams engines, pebble bed reactors. I'm ready for your questions. And I've got a whole list of references here if anybody's interested. Yes?
What do you think of events like Chernobyl? So what they...
Okay, well, you know, to me, it's great that people can always remember the accidents that happened in the nuclear industry, because that's almost like the man bites dog story, okay? If accidents happened all the time in nuclear, nobody would remember the accident. But since we can name Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island, we remember them. Now, Chernobyl happened over 20 years ago. 3 Mile Island happened almost 30 years ago. Since then, we've been operating a large portion of our electric power system using nuclear reactors. We have 440 operating in the world, and we haven't had anything else like that. Okay? How many people here remember what happened on December 23rd, 2003 in a small area in China when 190 people died and 9,000 people went to the hospital because of a leak in a natural gas well? How many people remember the last time a coal mine collapsed? How many people remember the last time a coal-fired power plant blew up and killed a few of its operators? How many people remember the last time an apartment building blew up because of natural gas? We don't remember those things because they happen with depressing regularity. Yes?
What's the physical explanation for the negative temperature coefficient of reactivity?
Okay. The graphite in the reactor is used as a moderator. And what that means is that there's a little bit higher probability of neutrons that are slow causing a reaction in uranium, okay? When the graphite heats up, it expands a bit and is a less effective moderator, okay? So if the graphite heats up, it becomes less effective as a moderator, meaning that more neutrons will leak out of the core instead of running into other uranium, causing fission. So that negative temperature coefficient works, by the way, in light water reactors also, okay? As long as the light water reactor is designed properly, because water has the ability of being both a moderator and a poison. So you have to balance those. By the way, Chernobyl had the problem of having graphite moderation and water cooling, okay? And what happened at Chernobyl was the moderator stayed there, but the water, which was cooling and a poison, evaporated, which made the reactor have a positive reinforcement. And most of you are systems engineers and probably understand the hazards of having positive feedback. Yes?
You mentioned about the recycling technologies. Can you give a couple of examples of commercial applications of such?
Sure. Right now, France and the UK have large recycling operations in progress, and Japan has just about finished their recycling. All of the commercial fuel in France gets recycled at Le Hague and gets put back into other reactors. And in the UK, the same thing happens. They use what's called mixed oxide fuels. Now, Japan and Russia and a few other places in Germany have looked at some of the other products besides the spent fuel, the stuff that's still uranium, and that's where they're looking at things like rhodium and platinum and ruthenium extract out of the fission products. It's a couple of useful fission products that have been used in the US. Strontium-90, which people get scared about, is a great heat source for a radioisotope thermal generator. It can be used in batteries that last 15, 20 years. And cesium-137 can be used as a source of irradiation for sterilizing medical products or food. Okay? Yes?
What are some of the forecasts for fission fuel in terms of availability and depletion?
Well, right now there's a constraint in the availability of fission fuel as it's, quote, traded on the market. But one of the things that has to be remembered is uranium is not really traded on any open market right now. It is exchanged in trade, and the quoted price for uranium has jumped up dramatically in the last 5 years. The quoted price for uranium in 2000 was under $10 a pound, and right now it's flirting with about $95 a pound. But the vast majority of uranium that's actually moved in the world today is already locked up in long-term contracts, and the average price that utilities are paying for uranium is on the order of $25 or $30 a pound. Okay, so there's a lot of talk about, hey, there's not enough uranium. There's not enough uranium in the free market right now, but there's a lot of places in the world, particularly places like New Mexico, Colorado, Australia, Canada, where there's huge known deposits, but we weren't mining it because at $8 a pound it wasn't profitable. At $90 a pound it's real profitable. $20 a pound is good enough, really. So there's a lot of uranium in the world. It's as common as tin, and if uranium gets to be a problem, which I don't see that ever happening, you can also use thorium, which is 3 times as common as uranium.
Can you say anything about the energy return on energy invested for fission, including the mining and?
Well, actually, mining is very easy for uranium. In the US, most of our uranium is mined using in situ mining, which is a process that, if you go, it looks really boring, okay? What they do is they drill holes into a limestone deposit that has uranium in it, and they fill the limestone holes with a solution that will dissolve the uranium, and it brings it up to the surface, and they take the uranium out. Very low energy use. And the solution is really, really dangerous stuff. It's carbon dioxide and water, okay? It's basically soda water, because all you need is slightly acidic water to dissolve uranium. And around this in situ mine, they have monitoring wells, so they know that none of the dissolved uranium leaches out. So mining is a very low energy use operation. Enrichment takes some energy use, but most of the studies that people talk about and say that there's a lot of energy used in enriching uranium, they always look at the old gaseous diffusion plants that were built in the 1940s when we didn't know anything else. They never compare with centrifuge production. When it comes to using modern technology in centrifuge production, the energy needed to produce finished fission fuels is less than 1% of what you get out. Okay? And in some cases, it's far less than 1% because, for example, in Canada, they have mines where the mine is 20% ore content uranium. I mean, it's really concentrated. Doesn't require much effort at all to get it out, except you have to do it with remote mining machines. And then they use natural uranium reactors. They don't do enrichment at all. Yeah?
What's the status of nuclear power development in the United States right now? Is there a change in politics? Is there a change in the economics?
There's huge changes in politics since the Energy Policy Act of 2005. 2005, August of 2005, if you talk to people in the nuclear industry, they figured there might be 2 or 3 new plants built before 2020, okay? Energy Policy Act of 2005 was passed, which offered some incentives for early use, gave nuclear power plants, rightfully so, a production tax credit because they're also emission-free power sources, just like wind and solar, but only for a couple of plants, by the way. And then the government, the administration has stood up several times, and said, hey, we want nuclear power as a way of response to fossil fuel addiction and global climate change. So now, today, 34 plants are being planned. And that's large central station light water reactors. Nobody's counting Adams engines yet because we haven't told the NRC, or we haven't got docketed yet. We've talked to the NRC. But as soon as you get docketed and officially start applying for a license, the government starts the ticker. And the ticker is $240 per bureaucrat hour for every hour spent talking to you, reviewing your license, whatever. The NRC is a bunch of lawyers and engineers, but they count every time you talk to them on the phone. They have a little, charge card that keeps going. So we're waiting till we're really ready before we start paying those fees. Yes?
What has to happen in the regulatory environment before somebody can put one of these in their apartment building and use its power?
There's a couple of things that have to happen in the regulatory environment. First of all, there has to be some proof, and we can do that, but some demonstrations of what happens when the worst case accident happens. Not modeling, but real demonstrations, and show that it's a really boring event. Because right now, the regulations require setbacks. Okay, they require exclusion areas and evacuation zones and all that. But the regulations were written assuming that all the power plants are light water reactors where you have steam and high pressure water and a bunch of other things that can cause hate and discontent. Not that I think that they're dangerous. They just have to have a lot of effort to keep them safe. The other piece that we're struggling with right now is that the government has made the assumption that all reactors should be treated equally, which means that the license fee for a 10 megawatt Adams engine is exactly the same as the license fee for a 1,700 megawatt Mitsubishi Heavy Industries reactor that's going to be built in Amarillo, Texas. That license fee right now is about $4 million a year, okay? Now, there's a lot of complexities in a 1,700 megawatt electric plant that are not in a 10 megawatt electric Adams engine. There's not much to it. We basically have 4 components: a compressor, a turbine, a heat exchanger, and a reactor. Okay? Highest pressure in the system is only about 120 psi. And that's only in the portion where the reactor is. The rest of the system's operating at basically atmospheric pressure. So, yes?
How about where we have the technology may go to the wrong hands?
That's a great question, okay? Small reactors, some people say, well, geez, we'll be able to steal these things. I'm not talking about something that's small enough to really be able to lift it up, okay? It's going to be inside a vault, probably about, the early ones will be in about a 30 by 30 building. The guy in Texas wants to build it. His property is on a granite dome. And he's actually, one of his serial entrepreneurial jobs in the past was he ran a company called Texas Crust Stone, which is a quarry operation. So he understands how to dig into granite. He wants to put the reactor inside a 50 by 30 by 20 granite dome on his property, okay, with a lid on top of it.
I'm not mentioning about the physical reactor.
I meant about the technology and say particular dangerous countries or parties.
Well, there's nothing we can do to stop knowledge of nuclear fission, okay? Nuclear fission exists. It wasn't something invented by humans. It was discovered by humans, okay? Many of the countries that you're talking about, we actually spent quite a bit of time. You know, I remember I'm a child of the I was born in 1959, but I went to school in the 1970s. And an awful lot of students in the US engineering were people from Iran. Okay? Iran had an awful lot of technicians here in the US, engineers. They understand how to do this stuff. Okay? We don't think that this technology is dangerous or hazardous or anything else, as long as it's done properly. Okay? We don't understand why anybody will want to bother building a bomb when you can build power plants that make the world a better place to live. Okay? I also believe when a country that has been in the energy business for most of its existence says, we recognize that we need more sources of energy. We think this has got a lot of legs. We're going to develop nuclear technologies. Because, oh, by the way, we operate oil wells. We know that they run out. Yes?
What has to happen in the regulatory environment around the movement of fuels? Who decides when you can buy fuel and when you have to do with it?
Not a whole lot. I mean, we move commercial fuel all the time, all around the country. I mean, there's only 2 plants in the US that actually make commercial nuclear fuel, and we got reactors in about 30 states. So there's already existing regulations for how you move fuel, what you have to do to move the fresh fuel, all that stuff. The waste, or not the waste, the byproduct materials, I got to keep changing my own language, but the byproduct materials right now are all stored on site because they can. It doesn't take up much space, okay? We only have to put aside 1/10 of a cent per kilowatt hour of electric power produced to pay for the cost of storing the material, okay? Moving it to a single location or some regional locations is also within current regulations. There are containers that have already been designed, licensed, and tested. The transport containers for used nuclear fuel are some pretty amazing devices. They're very simple. They're concrete, steel, lead structures, but they're designed so that you can crash them into a solid concrete wall at 80 miles an hour. Then you take the same container and you run it into the side with a railroad locomotive. Then you drop the container on a spike. Then after you do all that, you douse it with petroleum and you burn it for 30 minutes and you see if it leaks. Okay? There's videos on, you guys can find videos like this on the web, okay? They show these tests. It's pretty amazing, okay? Now, to me, I'm pretty satisfied with that, especially when I think about what would happen if instead of moving some fission fuel around, I had to ride on a highway behind these guys. Okay? Those guys scared the heck out of me on the highway. Yes? Graphite in certain configurations is flammable. Okay? This graphite ball, you'd have a very hard time lighting that on fire. Okay? But also remember that these reactors are filled with inert gases. Okay? We use nitrogen as our gas. Okay? But even if the nitrogen was to go away, the most that could happen would be to get some oxygen in there. And the amount of oxygen and burning that would be available is almost nothing. Okay? Again, the outer coating is very difficult to burn. Remember, graphite is exactly the same chemical composition as diamonds. There's a scale of flammability in graphite, and certain kinds of graphite don't burn at all. Yes?
What would your argument is for using such a new technology when it took us 150 years to decide that fossil fuels didn't work?
Well, who said fossil fuels don't work?
I think 100 years from now we'll think they were a mistake.
Well, I would hate to live in a world where we never used fossil fuels. I mean, I'm not gonna stand here and tell you that I think that industrialized civilization is a bad thing. I mean, I've lived in areas and I've visited areas where they don't have commercial fuel sources. It's not a fun place to be. You can't drink the water. You can't have fresh water unless you carry it on your head. Women spend their whole days carrying twigs, and in some places denuding the entire area because that's the only thing they can do is find little twigs to heat their food. So I don't think that fossil fuels are a bad thing. My challenge, though, is how can we extend some of the benefits of civilization to people in a time when we are, in fact, getting to the point where we can't produce the fossil fuels as fast as we're burning them. Okay? Peak oil doesn't mean that the fossil fuels are gone. It means that you have produced half of what there is to produce. And from then on, the rate of production will go down every year, even as the demand goes up. Yes?
The usual criticism on the part of U.S. administration and so the terrorist war hysteria is that nuclear reactors become target for possible attacks.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell what has been done in order to convince the government or the authoritative organs of the
Well, the U.S. government's pretty satisfied with the protection that U.S. nuclear plants have. Now, there are definitely some folks that are against fission who are never going to be satisfied, okay? And there's lots of reasons why those people will never be satisfied. I do believe that some of them are motivated by money. And some of them are motivated by money to keep trying to make people afraid of a competitor. The U.S. government says that our existing reactors are pretty safe against terrorists. And quite frankly, I've been to a few recently. Most Americans can't go there. I happen to have the right, checks in the block and whatnot. But I think that we've overstepped the security to the point where it's bad for overall safety, in that we don't even let the visitor centers where kids used to go and learn more about this technology, we didn't let them stay open. We've moved them so far away from the plant they don't mean anything to kids anymore. The idea that a commercial airliner can crash into a containment dome and do anything other than go splat like a bug it's amazing to me. I've seen the way those buildings are constructed. Rebar as big around as my forearm. Concrete that I can almost not reach, this thick of concrete. A steel container inside of that, okay? I know what commercial airlines are really like. They look like big monstrosities, right? But they're just an aluminum can, okay? They're just an aluminum can. The only thing that has any mass in an airline is the engines at the end of the wing. Okay? I happen to have seen the residue of an airplane hitting a large concrete building. I work in Washington, D.C. I don't have any concern that they would do much damage to the business end of a nuclear power plant. Now, they can certainly do something to the transformers outside. No doubt about that. Yes?
What if say, an airplane was running using, say, an Adams engine and crashed into something?
The interesting thing about a nuclear reactor is that in order to be safe, in order for it to be something that I want to be next to, it has to be surrounded by a vault known as a shield, okay? It has to have a large amount of lead, steel, concrete layered in a way to protect you from radiation. And what that means is that they can take a real heavy blow and keep on ticking, okay? So if I was in a place where an airplane powered by an Adams engine fell on my head, I'd die, okay? But if I was very far away and it missed me, I wouldn't get hit by the flames at all, and I probably wouldn't see any radiation exposure. I don't know if you all remember, but not too long ago, a US submarine going at fairly high rates of speed ran into a mountain, you know, and nothing happened to the power plant, you know. Pretty cool. Not something I want to recommend to you, by the way. It can ruin your whole day and your career and everything else. So, yes?
So you're still, with the Adams engine, you're still envisioning a large containment building and everything built around it for protection?
Well, large is a relative term. I believe that our engines will have a building around them, a vapor-tight pressure boundary, a vault, if you will, that protects the plant, protects the people who work around the plant, and ensures that nobody can get into it, okay? It's going to be probably, you know, for a 10 megawatt reactor, be about a 30 by 30 building, 30 by 30 by 30, which is 3 stories tall and, you know, not too much bigger than your average living room. By the way, that's big enough to supply a town of about 10,000 people. Not bad. Well, can also push a ship around. Yes?
So with a lot of the waste, if it takes hundreds of years to become safe, how do you store something like that? I mean, even in the containers you talked about, like if the water table changes, then these containers are sitting in water for hundreds of years.
Why would they be sitting in water? I'm not going to put my containers anywhere but above ground and have them monitored by people.
Over hundreds of years, what the environment is going to look like, especially with global climate change. If it starts, it would be really easy for something like the water table to shift over that period of time.
Right. I understand.
Or if you start above ground, then you actively have to maintain that building that it's stored in.
I have to actively maintain. Yes.
And then doesn't the price of maintaining that building over hundreds of years become uneconomical? I mean, you fill these buildings with waste you create today to maintain the waste for hundreds of years.
Depends on how much you endow the investment with up front, right? If you take a big wad of money, it generates money for us, right? If you take a big enough wad of money, you can, you know, pay your security force or whatever forever.
Are people doing that?
Yes, they have to put these big set-asides.
Yeah, I mean, right now, again, with just a sliver of money, 1/10 of a cent per kilowatt hour generated, okay, at a time when the average electric power price in the US is 8.5 cents a kilowatt hour. Okay, 1/10 of a cent, that generates almost $1 billion a year. Okay, the Nuclear Waste Disposal Fund in the US has a total endowment right now of about $28 billion. The interest on $28 billion can pay for an awful lot of security guards forever. Okay, yes?
What's the status of the repository at Yucca Mountain?
Well, I hope that the status of the repository at Yucca Mountain is exactly what Senator Reid says it is, which is dead. I don't think that Yucca Mountain is necessary. I think Yucca Mountain is a waste of money that's being used as a distraction and a way to slow the nuclear industry from development. The nuclear industry is finally beginning to recognize that it's far better to talk about recycling the fuel, to plan for recycling the fuel and capturing the used material. I mean, we're not talking about storing it forever. Well, you have to put enough material in one place to make it economical to run a recycling plant. You can't build a recycling plant because you have a small store of aluminum cans because 1 day's worth of production. Okay, and what do I do tomorrow? Okay, you need to have some of that fuel stored aside. So I think that Yucca Mountain, particularly now, is not going to happen. Harry Reid is the senator from Nevada. He is the Senate Majority Leader, and he has said that he doesn't want Yucca Mountain to happen. As Senator Domenici told us at an American Nuclear Society gathering not too long ago, he says, I don't think that Harry Reid, after fighting Yucca Mountain for the last 10 years, woke up the day he became Senate Majority Leader and said, now that I have more power, I'm going to give in.
So what about secondary waste? I mean, everything that surrounds a reactor becomes bombarded with neutrons and stuff like that.
Correct.
And so it's not just the fuel itself, which you could probably recycle much more efficiently. What about all that secondary?
Well, of course, one of the things that's interesting to me is that many of those secondary systems can be recycled also. You're right. You don't want to have the pressure vessel material, the pressure vessel, which is being hit by neutrons, that metal going out into the open market. But if we were in a situation where we are actually building new reactors, we're going to have sources of metal for the new reactors. Old reactors would be a great source of metal for new reactors, particularly after they've been sitting around for a while. And the other good thing is that we don't have to replace that particular part very often. The pressure vessels, the part that actually gets bombarded with neutrons, is something that looks like it's going to last for at least 60 years, and maybe even longer. The existing power plants in the U.S., many of them, about 43, have been extended from a 40-year license to a 60-year license. But the NRC is already talking about how they're going to check them for the next 20-year extension after that. All the rest of the power plant materials don't really get bombarded by neutrons. They get exposed to some radioactive materials through the circulation of the water. One of the things that's nice about gas-cooled reactors is our circulating working fluid's inert. Very little corrosion products exist. We have operated some gas-cooled reactors in the world, and after a period of time, it looks like those reactors have about 1/10 the amount of corrosion product type activation in their primary systems. So it's a pretty neat thing. Yes?
What kind of downtime is associated with the refueling cycle?
We haven't got to that kind of detailed design for our reactors. Commercial power plants today have getting down to about between 20 and 30 days every 18 months for refueling. They take about 1/3 of the core and replace it. And so the average element in the core actually stays in the core about 4.5 to 5 years. The AVR that was built in Germany was actually designed for continuous online refueling. And the Pebble bed modular reactor that's being built in South Africa and the one that's operating in China is actually designed for online refueling. For the markets that we want to serve, that's too complicated. We're going to do batch replacements. And so we think we're going to get the refueling time down at least less than 30 days. It's a small reactor, not going to take a whole lot of power or time. And we think we're going to go about 6 to 10 years before we need to refuel, rather than every 18 months. One of the neat things today, we've got submarines out there just being launched, the Virginia-class submarines. They're designed to go for 33 years without new fuel. Pretty cool. Yeah.
Curious about, you mentioned peak oil.
Mm-hmm.
Have you done the math on sort of peak uranium at usage rates that would be implied by depletion of other fossil fuels?
I can't handle numbers that far into the future. I'm being a little facetious, but they really are way out there, as long as you don't think about using just the 0.7% of uranium that's U-235. As long as you plan on a smart conversion, breeding, recycling system where you're using more and more of the heavy metal materials. And at that point, you talk about millennia before you start running out of uranium. Even if it was supplying all of our current power needs. There's a lot of it out there. Yes?
Can I just make a comment on the waste?
Go ahead.
One perspective I might throw out is when you talk about nuclear waste, what you have to consider is the alternative. Right now, we're pumping billions of tons of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere from fossil fuel burn. That would cause effects on the environment that last thousands of years. Talk about hundreds of years, thousands of years, okay? Talk about global warming. Global warming is caused by waste. So I think what a lot of people are starting to face is it's a choice between nuclear waste or carbon waste. Which one are you going to choose?
Or alternative energy.
Well, if alternative energy suddenly springs to life and supplies huge amounts of electricity in the next 30 years, I'd be really happy. But I haven't seen anyone show me how that's going to happen.
Well, it hasn't got the funding as the nuclear energy has.
Okay.
Anyway, that's just it's a big discussion, no doubt.
I guess we're not back on anymore. I was going to show you. Reminds you of the graph. Okay. If you go and look at the DOE, they have this thing called the Energy Information Administration. It's a great source of all kinds of real facts about energy usage. I always give their predictions a huge grain of salt, but they're pretty good at recording what has happened in the past and what is happening today. And right now, the only way that anything other than nuclear, coal, wood, oil, and gas, and hydroelectricity shows up on the charts is if they start combining wind and solar with wood waste and municipal solid waste and all that stuff in their charts. Otherwise, it doesn't even show up on the graph. It doesn't make a bump. Okay, and we've been looking at that stuff for a long time. Humans have known the sun has energy as long as humans have been around. Humans have known that the wind has energy. I mean, we've been sailing ships around the ocean forever. We built windmills. I just saw a windmill when I was in Texas, you know, one of those old-fashioned windmills. We've known it's there. If it was such a great source of energy, either all of the people before us have been really stupid, or maybe they weren't. I don't think they were. I don't think that all the billions of people that lived before me are that ignorant. I just don't. Anybody else? I appreciate your time and your questions, and thanks for inviting me. And I also want to tell you, I'm not smacking up to you guys, and that's a Navy term, but I really want to thank you for what you guys do, because what you do makes it possible for me to do all kinds of really neat stuff. I've been using your systems for a long time, so keep it up.